Get your trash brewery out of my plaza. We are leasing this space to a billion-dollar national chain. Gregory Sterling screamed, throwing the thick stack of eviction papers right at my chest. His son Christian, a 31-year-old trust fund baby, smirked from the doorway, arms crossed. I looked down at the documents, then up at Gregory's red, veins-bulging face. I did not yell, I did not argue, I just slowly folded the papers, slipped them into my pocket, and nodded. Understood. We will vacate the premises by Monday morning. They thought they had won. They thought they were taking my entire custom-built taproom and outdoor beer garden to hand over to their corporate franchise. They had absolutely no idea. They had just triggered a ticking time bomb. My family owned the soil this plaza was built on long before Gregory Sterling ever laid eyes on it. Back in the 1970s and 80s, my father, Arthur Vance, operated the Vance family farm, a 12-acre spread of rich Oregon soil in what is now a bustling, high-density commercial district of Portland. We grew berries, hops, and kept a small apple orchard. But as the city expanded, the taxes rose, and my father's knees grew stiff. Gregory Sterling, then a young, fast-talking developer with Sterling Developments, came knocking on our door in 1988. He offered my father a sum of money that seemed like a fortune at the time. My father agreed to sell the 12 acres, but he was a stubborn, practical man who had seen too many farmers get swindled by slick city developers. Before he signed the final deed transfer, my father insisted on a series of covenants. The most crucial was a permanent, non-merger private utility easement. The northeast quadrant of the farm, where the main municipal water main and the county's primary sewer trunk line entered the property, was carved out. The deed explicitly stated that the Vance family retained absolute ownership and exclusive control over the private connection lines and laterals running through that specific quadrant, which was designated as Section C. Gregory Sterling was so eager to get the land and start building his dream shopping center that he barely glanced at the utility easement clause. His lawyers told him it was a standard access reservation for municipal maintenance. They did not realize my father had insisted on making it a private, personal easement that ran with the Vance family, not the land. Years passed, and Gregory built Sterling Square Plaza. It became a thriving commercial hub, home to a high-end organic grocery store, a regional fitness center, and a dozen retail shops. I went off to college, studied microbiology, and fell in love with the science of brewing. In 2011, I returned to Portland with a dream. I wanted to open a microbrewery. I approached Gregory Sterling to lease Section C, the very quadrant where my father's old farmhouse used to stand. Gregory, remembering my father, gave me a 15-year lease. He thought it was poetic justice that he was renting the land back to the son of the man who sold it to him. He also charged me a premium rent, confident that a local brewery would never survive. He was wrong. Over the next 15 years, I poured my life, my savings, and my soul into Vance Craft Brewing. I designed the entire layout myself. Because brewing requires massive amounts of water and creates significant organic wastewater discharge, I invested over $250,000 in custom infrastructure. I ran a high-capacity, 3-inch copper water supply line directly from the main connection. I installed a commercial-grade industrial grease trap and a specialized wastewater neutralization tank in the basement of Section C. I built a beautiful outdoor beer garden with custom brickwork, fire pits, and a 20-tap draft system that drew hundreds of patrons every weekend. We became the beating heart of Sterling Square Plaza. While retail shops struggled, my brewery was always packed. We drove foot traffic to the grocery store, the gym, and the surrounding restaurants. I paid my rent on time every single month without fail, but success breeds envy, especially in the minds of greedy developers. In 2025, Gregory's son, Christian Sterling, graduated from business school and was made a junior partner at Sterling Developments. Christian did not care about community, long-term partnerships, or the history of the plaza. He only cared about spreadsheet metrics and maximizing short-term yields. He saw the massive crowds at Vance Craft Brewing every Friday and Saturday night and decided that the plaza was missing out on a gold mine. Christian did not want to collect rent from me anymore. He wanted a piece of the action. He wanted a national sports bar franchise, Megapubs Incorporated, to take over Section C. Megapubs had over 300 locations across the country, and they were willing to pay double my rent rate. More importantly, they had agreed to give Sterling Developments a percentage of their gross beverage sales. The only obstacle was my 15-year lease, which was not set to expire until 2026. Gregory and Christian knew I would never voluntarily walk away from the business I spent 15 years building. So they decided to construct a conspiracy to get rid of me. They began sending me formal warnings about minor, fabricated issues. First, it was the noise from the beer garden, even though we closed the outdoor area at 9 in the evening, well before the city's 10 o'clock curfew. Then, they claimed our delivery trucks were blocking the plaza's loading zones. But their primary weapon, the one they thought would destroy me legally and financially, was the environmental compliance clause in my lease. They claimed my brewery was discharging toxic wastewater into the plaza's shared drainage system, violating municipal regulations and putting the entire shopping center at risk of city fines. I knew my wastewater neutralization system was operating perfectly, but Christian had hired a private, corrupt environmental testing firm to fabricate the results. The stage was set, and the trap was about to close. They thought they had me cornered. They believed I would panic, agree to sell them my expensive brewing equipment for pennies on the dollar, and quietly walk away to avoid a lawsuit. They underestimated me, and they completely forgot about the history of the very ground they stood on. It was a chilly Tuesday afternoon in November when Christian Sterling first stepped into my office at the brewery, smelling of expensive cologne and cheap ambition. He did not look at the copper fermenters through the glass window or acknowledge the shift supervisor who greeted him. He walked straight to my desk and dropped a heavy leather folder onto it. He sat down without being invited, adjusted his designer tie, and gave me a patronizing smile. "Marcus, we need to talk about the future of this space," he began, his voice dripping with false concern. "The market is shifting, and frankly, a local craft brewery is no longer the highest and best use for Section C." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. I had seen this coming for months. Christian had been sniffing around my operations, asking my head brewer about the capacity of our glycol chillers, the electrical draw of our three-phase power upgrades, and the volume of our municipal water usage. "What do you have in mind, Christian?" I asked. He leaned forward, tapping the leather folder. "We have been approached by Megapubs Incorporated. They want this entire footprint, including your outdoor patio area. They are prepared to sign a 20-year lease at $95 a square foot. You are currently paying $45. We are offering you an exit. Sell us your brewing equipment, the refrigeration lines, the custom bar, and the walk-in coolers for $100,000, and we will let you walk away from the remaining year of your lease without penalty." I had to suppress a laugh. $100,000? The custom copper-clad mash tun and the 5 double-walled fermentation tanks alone had cost me $180,000 to import from Germany. The commercial boiler system, the glycol piping, and the specialized floor drains were worth another $100,000. Christian was offering me pennies on the dollar, planning to hand over a fully functional, turnkey restaurant and brewery infrastructure to a national chain so they could open within a week of my departure. I looked him dead in the eye. "The equipment is not for sale, Christian, and my lease has 14 months left. I have no intention of vacating early. We are in the middle of our peak winter season, and our distribution to local grocery chains is stronger than ever." Christian's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, arrogant sneer that looked exactly like his father's. "I thought you might say that, Marcus. You have that stubborn Vance blood in you. But you need to understand that we run this plaza, not you. If you will not take the easy way out, we will have to do this the hard way." He tapped the leather folder again. "Inside, you will find a formal notice of material lease breach. Our private environmental inspectors conducted a water quality audit on the discharge lines leaving Section C last week. The results show levels of chemical organic waste and suspended solids that are 300% above the city's allowable limit. Under Section 12.3 of your lease agreement, you are in direct violation of municipal environmental standards." I pulled the reports from the folder and scanned them. The testing had been performed by a firm called Green Shield Analytics, a boutique firm I knew was owned by one of Christian's former college roommates. The data was laughably fabricated. They claimed to have taken samples during a heavy brewing cycle, but the dates on the report showed the samples were collected on a Monday morning when the brewery was completely shut down for sanitization. There was no way our effluent had those levels of acidity or suspended yeast solids. I set the papers down. This is garbage, Christian. Our neutralization tanks adjust the pH of every gallon of water before it enters the municipal system. We run daily tests, and our logs are submitted directly to the city's water bureau. Your Green Shield report is a complete fabrication. Christian stood up, buttoning his jacket. It does not matter what you think, Marcus. The lease states that the landlord's designated inspector is the sole arbiter of environmental compliance. You have 30 days to cure the breach. If you cannot prove to our satisfaction that the levels are corrected, we will terminate your lease for cause. Under Section 14.2, seize the fixtures to offset our damages and evict you. You have two choices: take the $100,000 now, or leave with nothing and face a $500,000 lawsuit for environmental damage to our plaza's infrastructure. Have a nice day. Over the next 3 weeks, Gregory and Christian Sterling tightened the screws. They refused to accept my internal water logs. They blocked my independent tester from entering the plaza's utility rooms to verify the sampling point. Every letter my cousin and lawyer, Sarah Vance, sent to their legal team was met with stonewalling and threats of immediate lockout. They were confident they had me trapped. Christian even brought representatives from Megapubs Inc. to walk around the exterior of my beer garden, pointing at my custom wood-fired pizza ovens and the outdoor draft towers, talking loudly about where they would place their corporate neon signs. On the 29th day, the final blow came. I was standing behind the bar, polishing clean pint glasses, when Gregory Sterling himself walked in, accompanied by Christian and a deputy sheriff, holding a formal eviction order. The regular customers went quiet as Gregory marched up to the counter, a look of triumph on his weathered face. He threw the thick stack of eviction papers right at my chest. Get your trash brewery out of my plaza. We are leasing this space to $1 billion national chain. Gregory screamed, his voice echoing off the exposed brick walls. Christian smirked from the doorway, arms crossed, enjoying every second of my public humiliation. I looked down at the documents, then up at Gregory's red, veins-bulging face. My staff was looking at me, terrified and angry. The deputy sheriff looked slightly uncomfortable but stood ready. I took a deep breath. I did not yell. I did not argue. I just slowly folded the papers, slipped them into my pocket, and nodded. Understood, I said, my voice calm and steady. We will vacate the premises by Monday morning. Gregory laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Good choice, Vance. Glad to see you have more sense than your old man. Just leave the equipment and the pipes intact. They belong to the building now. They walked out, leaving me with the eviction notice. I turned to my head brewer, who was holding a copper wrench ready to fight. I smiled at him. Pack it up, boys. We're moving, but first we have some plumbing to do. The evening of the eviction, I sat in the conference room of my cousin Sarah's law office, surrounded by stacks of yellowing land deeds and county property map printouts. Sarah was typing furiously on her laptop, pulling up records from the Multnomah County Recorder of Deeds database. She had a cup of lukewarm coffee next to her, and her eyes were bright with the thrill of a legal hunt. Marcus, you need to understand how greedy developers worked back in the late 1980s, Sarah said, turning her screen toward me. When Gregory Sterling bought your father's land, he wanted to build fast and cheap. Your father, Arthur, was smart. He knew that the city's water main and sewer trunk lines entered the property from the northeast corner, which is now Section C. The developer wanted to tap into those lines to feed the entire shopping center. But your father refused to grant a general public utility easement. Instead, he kept a private non-merger easement. She pointed to a scanned PDF of the original 1988 deed, highlighting a paragraph in Section 7. Look at this clause, she said, tapping the screen. The grantor, Arthur Vance, reserves for himself, his heirs, and assigns a permanent, private, non-transferable easement over, under, and through the designated Section C for the purpose of operating and maintaining utility connections, including water mains and sewer laterals. The grantee, Sterling Developments, is granted a revocable, non-exclusive license to route its utility lines through said Section C easement, provided that the grantor or his heirs remain the active commercial occupant of Section C. In the event of eviction, termination, or non-renewal of the grantor's commercial lease by the grantee, the license to route utility lines through Section C shall immediately terminate, and the grantor shall have the absolute right to cap, sever, or redirect the utility lines within the easement boundaries without liability for damages to the grantee or any third party. I read the text twice, the legal language clicking into place. Gregory Sterling's lawyers had made a catastrophic error. To save money during the construction of the plaza in 1989, Gregory had routed the entire plaza's main water distribution manifold and the primary sanitary sewer collector lateral directly through the basement utility room of Section C, instead of running separate lines from the street for each building, which would have cost him an extra $100,000 in municipal trenching fees. He connected the entire 12-acre plaza, including the grocery store, the fitness center, and all 15 retail bays, to the trunk lines running directly under my brewery's leasehold. As long as I was the tenant, Gregory had the right to pass his water and sewage through my section. But by evicting me, Gregory had legally revoked his own license. The moment my lease was terminated, the Sterling Square Plaza's right to route water and sewage through Section C evaporated. Under the law, those pipes were running through my private easement without a license. I had the absolute legal right to sever the connection and cap the lines. "Are you sure this is airtight, Sarah?" I asked, a grin slowly forming on my face. "It is more than airtight, it's concrete," Sarah replied, leaning back in her chair. "The non-merger clause means this easement survived the sale of the land and is completely independent of the lease agreement. Gregory's legal team was so focused on using a fake environmental report to evict you that they completely forgot to check the original land deed from 40 years ago. They thought they were taking your brewery. Instead, they just gave you the right to turn off their water and plug their toilets. We spent the next 3 days preparing our exit. Under the terms of the eviction order, we had until Sunday night at midnight to vacate the property. My team worked around the clock. We did not leave our expensive brewing equipment behind for Christian to give to megapubs. We hired a professional rigging crew, and by Friday evening, all 5 copper fermentation tanks, the mash tun, the glycol chillers, and the bottling line were loaded onto flatbed semi-trucks and moved to a secure warehouse I had rented across town. We stripped the bar, removed the taps, and took down every piece of lighting. We left the space as a clean, bare concrete shell, exactly as the lease required for a vacating tenant. On Sunday morning, I met with a specialized commercial utility contractor I had hired through Sarah's recommendations. They arrived in unmarked white vans, carrying heavy-duty hydraulic pipe cutters, industrial expansion plugs, and high-pressure concrete sealing equipment. We went down into the dark, damp utility basement of Section C. The basement was a maze of heavy copper pipes and thick iron sewer mains. The contractor, a seasoned municipal plumber named Bob, studied the blueprints Sarah had provided. "This is the main 4-inch copper water inlet for the entire plaza," Bob said, pointing to a massive blue valve, "and this 6-inch cast iron line is the primary sanitary sewer collector. Everything from the grocery stores produce misting systems to the gym's showers and toilets flows right through this room before it hits the city main under the street." "Let's do it," I said. Bob's crew went to work. First, they closed the main shutoff valve on the 4-inch water line, effectively cutting off the water supply running through the easement. Then, using a hydraulic pipe cutter, they sliced a section out of the copper pipe, threaded the open ends, and screwed on heavy-duty, lockable brass end caps. For the sewer line, they ran an inflatable mechanical test plug deep into the cast iron lateral, inflated it to 80 pounds of pressure using a compressor, and poured a fast-setting, high-strength industrial epoxy grout behind the plug, sealing the pipe completely. By Sunday evening at 8 o'clock, the utility lines running through Section C were permanently capped and sealed. The work was done. I walked upstairs to the empty tap room, took one last look at the concrete floor where my brewery had stood for 15 years, and walked out the door, locking it behind me. I drove home, poured myself a bottle of my own stout, and waited for Monday morning. Monday morning, at 8 o'clock, was when the storm officially hit Sterling Square Plaza, though it did not involve rain. It started with a series of minor anomalies that quickly escalated into a full-blown commercial disaster. At the Fresh Harvest Organic Market, the store manager arrived to prep the fresh seafood display and turn on the automatic misting systems for the organic produce. He twisted the main intake valve in the back room, but nothing happened. The sprayers remained dry. Over at the Ironclad Fitness Center, the early morning crowd of over 200 members finished their spin classes and ran to the locker rooms to shower before work. They turned the handles, but only a dry, whistling sound came out of the shower heads. Within 30 minutes, members were complaining to the front desk, sweaty and furious. But the real crisis began in the restrooms. Because the primary sewer lateral in the basement of Section C was completely plugged and sealed with industrial epoxy, there was nowhere for the waste of the entire plaza to go. When the gym members tried to flush the toilets, the water rose instead of falling. By 8:45, the common area restrooms near the plaza's central courtyard began to overflow. A foul, unmistakable stench of raw sewage began to waft through the air vents, spreading into the retail boutique shops, the high-end nail salon, and the busy coffee shop. Christian Sterling arrived at the plaza at 9 o'clock, accompanying a crew of interior designers and contractors from Megapubs Incorporated. They walked into the empty shell of Section C, ready to measure the walls for their corporate branding. Instead, they were greeted by the sight of the plumbing contractors trying to trace the water blockage. The foreman of the Megapubs crew ran up to Christian, shouting, "There's no water in this entire building, and the sewer lines are backing up into the kitchen drains. We can't start any renovation work like this." At that exact moment, the manager of Fresh Harvest Market stormed out of his store, spotting Christian in the parking lot. "Christian!" the manager yelled, his face red with rage. "Our bakery can't run, our seafood department is shutting down, and we have no water to wash our hands. If this isn't fixed in an hour, I'm calling the corporate office, and we are suing Sterling Developments for loss of business. We have $30,000 worth of fresh meat and produce that will spoil if the health inspectors shut us down." Christian panicked. He ran to the main utility access room, only to find the door locked. He called the plaza's property manager, who arrived with the master keys. When they finally opened the door and descended into the basement of Section C, they were met by two of their maintenance workers standing in 3 inches of stagnant water. The workers pointed to the severed copper mains and the sealed cast-iron sewer line, capped with heavy brass fittings and locked tight with steel padlocks bearing the Vance family legal seal. "What is this?" Christian screamed, kicking a pile of debris. "Why are these lines capped? Who did this?" The property manager, who had been with the company for 20 years, looked at the brass caps, his face going pale. He recognized the name on the legal tags attached to the locks. "It's Marcus Vance," he whispered. "He didn't just move his brewery out. He cut the utility lines." Christian pulled out his phone and dialed my number. I was sitting in a quiet cafe 3 blocks away reading a book and sipping a black coffee. My phone began to vibrate on the table. Christian Sterling. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. This time it was Gregory Sterling. I ignored that one too. Over the next hour, my phone vibrated constantly. I received 23 missed calls and 12 text messages. The messages went from demanding to threatening, and finally to pleading. At 10:30, 2 vehicles from the Multnomah County Health Department pulled into the plaza. A tenant had called them after sewage began leaking onto the floor of the common area hallway. The inspectors did not take long to make their decision. A commercial plaza with no running water and active sewage backup was a Class 1 health hazard. They issued a mandatory immediate evacuation and closure order for the entire Sterling Square Plaza. Fresh Harvest Market had to turn away customers and lock its doors. The gym was evacuated, leaving hundreds of angry members standing in the parking lot in their workout clothes. Every retail shop was forced to close. The financial bleeding was catastrophic. Fresh Harvest alone was losing an estimated $50,000 a day in revenue, not counting the cost of ruined inventory. The gym was facing membership cancellations, and the retail tenants were already calling their lawyers to draft breach of lease notices against Sterling Developments. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Gregory Sterling sent a direct email to my personal address. The tone was completely different from his shouting match on Thursday. "Marcus, please call me. We have a major utility misunderstanding at the Plaza. We need to resolve this immediately. We are willing to discuss a settlement for your equipment and your relocation. Please." I forwarded the email to Sarah. She replied to Gregory's attorney within 10 minutes, keeping her response cool and professional. "Mr. Vance is currently unavailable. However, we have scheduled a meeting at my office for tomorrow, Tuesday morning at 9:30. If Mr. Gregory Sterling and Mr. Christian Sterling wish to discuss the utility easement, they must attend in person with authority to sign a binding agreement. Any further unauthorized attempts to tamper with the private utility lines in Section C will result in an immediate federal injunction for trespass on easement rights." That night, the plaza remained completely dark. The gates were locked and a security guard patrolled the empty parking lot. The greedy landlords had their empty plaza, but without my water and sewer, it was nothing more than a collection of useless concrete boxes. On Tuesday morning, the conference room of Vance and Associates was dead silent when Gregory and Christian Sterling walked in, accompanied by their chief legal counsel, a silver-haired attorney named Richard Vance. No relation to us, though Gregory looked nervous about the coincidence. Christian looked exhausted, his expensive suit wrinkled, his former smugness replaced by a hollow, defensive glare. Gregory, on the other hand, looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. His hands trembled slightly as he sat down across from Sarah and me. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Gregory said, his voice hoarse. "Marcus, you capped the water and sewer mains. You have shut down my entire plaza. Fresh Harvest is threatening to sue us for breach of contract, and the county health department has locked the gates. We are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every day this continues. Name your price to remove those caps." Sora smiled calmly, opening a folder. "Mr. Sterling, let's be precise under the law. My client did not illegally shut down your plaza. He simply exercised his private property rights under Section 7 of the 1988 farmland deed. When you chose to evict him based on a fraudulent environmental report, you automatically revoked your own license to route your utility lines through his easement. You are currently trespassing on his private utility easement." Richard, the Sterling's attorney, sighed and leaned forward. "Sarah, we've reviewed the 1988 deed. We acknowledge the easement is valid and non-merger, but a total shutdown is extreme. We can file an emergency petition in county court." "You can try," Sarah replied, her voice cool as ice. "But by the time you get a hearing date, which will take at least 2 weeks, the court will see that the easement is clear, private, and signed by Gregory himself. Furthermore, my client will countersue for trespass and tortious interference with his business operations, using the fabricated Green Shield water logs as evidence of bad faith. Your client signed a sworn affidavit claiming environmental contamination that they knew was false just to break a commercial lease. That is fraud. If we go to court, we will make sure the media and the district attorney get copies of those emails between Christian and Green Shield Analytics." Christian opened his mouth to speak, but Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "Shut up, Christian," Gregory snapped. Glaring at his son, he turned back to Sarah, his face tight. "What do you want?" Sarah slid a 3-page settlement agreement across the table. "The terms are simple and non-negotiable," she said. "First, you will purchase the physical utility easement and the underlying land of Section C from Marcus for $2.4 million. This figure is based on the cost you would incur to trench new municipal connections from the main street, which our engineers estimate would take 4 months and cost $1.5 million in city permits and construction. Combined with the projected tenant lawsuits and lost revenue during that 4-month shutdown." Gregory winced but did not interrupt. "Second," Sarah continued, "you will pay Mr. Vance $300,000 to cover his business relocation expenses and the cost of moving his brewing equipment. Third, you will sign a full unconditional release of all claims against Vance Craft Brewing, and you will issue a formal retraction of the environmental violation notice, admitting that the water quality reports were inaccurate. Finally, you will release my client from any liability regarding the removal of his equipment, $2.7 million. Christian burst out, standing up. That is extortion. We can fight this. Gregory looked at his attorney. Richard did not look back at him. He just stared at the ceiling, slowly nodding his head. Gregory, they have us, Richard said quietly. If the plaza remains closed for another week, Fresh Harvest will break their lease. If they leave, the bank will call the primary construction loan on the shopping center. You will lose the entire property. The $2.7 million is cheaper than bankruptcy. Gregory sat in silence for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at me, hoping to find some room for negotiation. I met his gaze, showing no emotion. I was thinking of my father, who had spent 50 years working this land, and how he had outsmarted this billionaire developer with a simple, handwritten clause in a deed 40 years ago. Bring me the pen, Gregory said, his voice barely a whisper. Dad, Christian protested, but Gregory ignored him. He signed the agreement, initialing every page. His attorney verified the signature and authorized the immediate wire transfer of $2,700,000 from Sterling Development's corporate escrow account into my business account. Within 30 minutes, Sarah's laptop chimed, confirming the receipt of the funds. I picked up my phone and called Bob, the utility contractor who was waiting in his van near the plaza. Bob, the contract is signed, I said. You can pull the plugs and restore the water. By Tuesday afternoon, the water was flowing again at Sterling Square Plaza, and the toilets were flushing. But the damage to the Sterling's reputation was permanent. To appease the plaza's angry anchor tenants and the board of directors, Gregory was forced to demote Christian, stripping him of his junior partnership, and sending him to manage a small, failing strip mall in rural Idaho. As for Vance Craft Brewing, we used the $2.7 million to purchase a historic 3-story brick warehouse in the heart of downtown Portland. The new location was triple the size of our old space, featuring a state-of-the-art 20-barrel brewhouse and a massive rooftop deck with panoramic views of the Willamette River and the city skyline. Because we did not have to pay rent to a greedy landlord, our profit margins doubled. We reopened our doors 6 months later, and the line to get in stretched down the block. On our opening night, I stood on the rooftop deck, watching the sunset over the city. The outdoor tables were filled with laughing patrons, and the smell of fresh hops and malt filled the air. I held up a pint of our new Imperial IPA, named the Easement Stout, and took a slow, cold sip. It tasted like absolute victory.